he's done. All the glory and the honor.
Hello, welcome back, young people. I am super excited to bring to you our very first fall lesson. And our first fall lesson is obedience in leadership. And it comes from Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. And as we look at our first unit, unit 1, we want to begin with obedience. And as we look at beginning with obedience and obedience in leadership, the time of writing, young people, is 1445 BC. The place is Mount Sinai. The golden text says, I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. And that comes from Exodus chapter 3, verse 10. The purpose, young people, of our lesson is to show that God has a plan to solve the problem we face in life. And as we think about this lesson, our main character is going to be Moses, and we're going to find Moses in the second, because if you look at Moses' life, the first 40 years were spent in Pharaoh's house. The next 40 years, which is where we're going to find him today, is going to be spent in the wilderness in Midian, and that's where we're going to find Moses at today. What I really love about this lesson, young people, is the fact that despite your feelings, despite you feeling inadequate, despite you not thinking that you have the right qualifications to do a job or to do what God has asked you to do, I'm here to tell you, in fact, if God chose you, then you are the right person for the job. And you're going to see, as we look at and get into the lesson, how Moses was the right person for the job that God needed Moses to take on. And so as we look at, the people of Israel had been living in the land of Egypt for some 400 years. They had been slaves most of that time. Moses had been in exile from his people for 40 years, living in the land of Midian. And so, as I said in the beginning, young people, Moses was, again, for those of you that are unfamiliar, and I'll take some time to kind of break it down a little bit, but Moses was born during a time where especially the male children were being killed. The Pharaoh that had come on the scene after the one that knew Joseph, he didn't like them, or he didn't like the fact that they were continuing to multiply, and he thought that they would in fact become a security problem. And so he sought to try to curve their numbers, if you will. And one of the ways that he tried to do that was to kill the newborns, right, when they were born. And so Moses was born in secret, and he was hid for 5 months, but it came a time where, you know, his folks had to kind of let him go. And, you know, again, nothing happens by coincidence. Again, Moses was chosen from the time that he was born to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. And so as God was supernaturally leading the basket that carried Moses down the river, he pushed him right on into the presence, if you will, of Pharaoh's daughter. And so Pharaoh brings Moses in. She asks her father if she can adopt him, essentially, and she raises him as her own. And again, young people, look at how God provides. God provided a way so that Moses' own mother would nurse him and kind of rear him, if you will, and look after him as he was coming up. Now, he living in Pharaoh's home, well, he was provided a world-class education. He was taught in military. He was taught in diplomacy, you know, reading, writing, and all of those things he was taught in. And so that would bless him again later on in life. And also it would, prepare him for, dealing with different people. And again, as we look at towards the end of Moses' first 40 years, Moses saw the plight of his people. And one day he came upon a scene, young folks, and there was an Egyptian. He was beating one of his fellow Israelites. And so Moses decided to step in because, Moses was, he didn't really think things out, at least, especially when he was younger. And so he reacted and he killed the man, right? So he kills the man thinking that, the Israelites were going to rally behind him and, this, that, and the third. And, he would go on and lead them and, and they would go on to what God had already promised. Unfortunately for Moses, that wasn't God's time. And so the very next day, Moses sees two fellow Israelites fighting, and, Moses steps in and he's like, hey, brothers, what's going on? Why, and then he basically got mocked. And one of them said, well, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? And then Moses in that moment realized, oh, man. And so Moses fled. He left the life he'd always known for 40 years, a life of luxury. He left all that behind and ran out into the wilderness. And so in him going out to the wilderness, he would run into, or he would meet Reuben, who we know as Jethro in our lesson today. He would go on to marry Jethro or Ruel's daughter Zipporah, excuse me. And then they would have a son named Gershom. And so now Moses is living out his days, just kind of, he's comfortable in the life that he now leads, right? He went from all of the luxury, and all of the trappings that come from being, recognized as one of, as being in the family of Pharaoh to, well, he's out here in the wilderness. And now at this point, he goes from being a prince to literally being a shepherd. And, a shepherd, while it is important, it was one of the more lowlier jobs, if you will, during ancient times. And so now Moses is out there and 40 years has gone by. And, the thing about God is God will wait until the right time. Now, we may have our own timeline in our heads, but it doesn't generally always line up. And sometimes it doesn't line up with God's timing. It's just what it is. And so we find Moses on the backside, and we're gonna see it. I'm running ahead a little bit. And so with that said, let's jump right into the verse. Matter of fact, Exodus 3:1, and now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb, excuse me. And so, again, as I said in the intro, Moses is, he's been here for 40 years now. So the 40-year-old Moses that came into Midian is now an 80-year-old Moses who, again, is a father, is a husband. He's, again, he's not even tending his own flock of sheep. He's tending to his father-in-law's flock of sheep. And, as we see it, he decides, and scripture doesn't really give us reason why he was on the backside of the mountain. Again, it could have been, God's leading, or it just could have been a situation where Moses really wanted to be alone, or he was looking for the very best land for the sheep, to kind of graze and do all of those things. And so, and again, Mount Horeb, excuse me, is also Mount Sinai. So if you hear Mount Sinai and you see Mount Horeb, they're both the same. And I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but I think you get the gist of it. And so as we look at our first 6 verses come under the title God's appearance to Moses, and the verse 1 comes under Moses in the wilderness. And so Moses had been living in Midian for 40 years, tending sheep for his father-in-law Jethro. When God came to him, he was doing the same thing he always did. And the funny thing about that, young people, is, sometimes sometimes we are in our normal routines, and that's when God will, hey, so and so. And then he'll have a conversation with you. It's when you're doing your regular, thing. It's, again, You may not, again, expect to see God in supernatural ways like what we're going to see here in our next verse. But again, it is during the regular routine of your life is when God can speak to you. And so he was on the backside of the desert. The word suggests a place far from civilization where he would not expect to meet anybody. So again, he went to a place where he thought that he would have solitude, just him and the sheep. In writing these words at a later time, Moses added a detail that reveals the plan God already had for his life. He said that he had come to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. It was near the very place where God would later give him the law that he first met with God. So again, those of you who are familiar, you're going to know that after he brought the children of Israel out, well, they stopped right there at that mountain, and that's where the law came. And so again, as I said in the introduction, God had already planned this thing out for Moses. Again, even going back to when he was born, right? Again, as I said, during that time, especially the male babies, they were sometimes killed, and it was a precarious time to be a Jew at that time, because again, the Egyptian people had shifted their opinion of them. Again, those of you that are familiar with scripture, when they first came 400 years ago, Pharaoh was right there with Joseph as they were coming. Jacob brought his whole family. There were 70 of them at the time. And Pharaoh was right there with Joseph, and Joseph ran out to meet his father, and they embraced and all of that stuff. And Pharaoh gave them, a little plot of land for everybody to kind of, live on. And now the time had passed where that Pharaoh was gone off the scene. And now, you're dealing with, a Pharaoh that doesn't see them in the same light. As we look at verse number 2, which is verse 2 and 3, which is under the subtitle, "An Intention Getting Signed." And so as we look at verse 2, young people, "And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed." So as he's just again out with his sheep doing his normal routine, Jesus came on the scene. And for those of you that are unfamiliar, again, anytime you see the angel of the Lord, a lot of times it is referencing the pre-incarnated Christ. So here we have Jesus speaking to Moses out of a flame that was burning a bush. And again, what made this bush special? Because again, in the desert, it is dry. They get lightning storms. Lightning can strike a dry bush and cause it to catch on fire, but that bush would eventually burn. It would turn into ash. And so as Moses is watching this bush burn, he's noticing that it's not being consumed. It's not turning to ash. And so now his curiosity has been piqued, right? And it's no different from us. If we see something that doesn't really truly make sense, or it looks, kind of weird, or, whatever, it may cause it. Now, some of us have the, I want to go check it out spirit, and some of us have the, look, I'm trying to get away from that. Moses had that, I want to go and check it out spirit. So Moses is now, he's drawing near to it. And as he drew near to it, God spoke to him. Again, young people, it's no different today. As you draw near to God, as you start to listen to the call, then it'll get progressively louder. So we're going to see, you're going to see later on in the verse that when Moses gave it his full attention, then God is going to speak to him. So again, the parallel is when you give God your attention, and he will speak to you. As we look at verse 3, "And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt." So again, as I said earlier, his curiosity was piqued. You've all saw things catch on fire, right? You know that after a certain point where it's going to burn out because the thing that caught fire is eventually going to turn into ash. So again, when he saw that it wasn't being consumed, that it wasn't turning into ash, he wanted to go and investigate. He wanted to know, well, what's going on here? And again, as we look at an attention getting sign, which covers 2 and 3, a burning bush was not so unusual in the desert, as I said earlier, where lightning could set a dry shrub on fire. It was unusual, again, for a bush to burn and not be consumed. That was what attracted Moses' attention and aroused in him a desire for further knowledge. He wanted to know why the bush was not turning to ashes. Again, as we parallel, again, if your walk is genuine, people are going to want to know, well, how did you get to this point? God was already revealing his power to Moses. He could create a fire that burned without consuming the fuel that made the flame possible. Again, with God, all things are possible. There is nothing that is impossible to God. As we look at verse 4, the call of God, and when the Lord saw he turned aside, when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses, and he said, here am I. So again, as I said, young people, and I ran ahead of the verse, but again, when Moses gave it his full attention, God spoke to him. And again, you've heard me say, those of you that have watched previous videos, God knows your name. He's not going to call you out by saying, hey, buddy. He's not going to say, bruh. He's not going to say, sis. He's not going to say, yo. He's not going to say, hey. He's going to call you by your name. And the fact that he even knows Moses' name, again, shows that he cares. Again, you know, there are a lot of people that you may run across, but you may not remember everyone's name. But the people who names you remember generally is because they stuck out. Something about them stuck to you, and so you remember their name. God knows who you are because he formed you in your mother's womb. He formed each and every one of us. So he knows all of our names. And the important thing that you see here from Moses is Moses said, here am I. He didn't say, who's calling me? Who is this? He didn't look around. Listen, a lot of you all have probably heard your name being called and looked around and didn't see anybody. Or you looked and it was you in the room. See, a lot of times when you have that happen, young people, the next time that happens, this is what I want. I want you to say the same thing Moses said. Here am I. And see what happens. And so Moses is saying, here am I. And so God has called out to him. And again, he's calling out to him in the midst of the bush. In the midst of a bush that is burning but is not being consumed. And so as we look at the call of God, the burning bush had attracted the attention of Moses. And once God had his interest, he was ready to give him further revelation. The initial miracle had prepared him to listen. So again, the fact that the bush was on fire and it wasn't being consumed piqued his interest. And now when the voice came out of the bush, well, now he was ready to, there's something else going on here. And so he was ready to listen because, again, his attention had already been grabbed by the fact that the bush was on fire, as I said, and not being consumed. He was ready to give him further revelation. The initial miracle had prepared him to listen, and God called unto him out of the midst of the bush. The fact that Moses responded immediately to the voice of God shows that he was ready to hear from him. It had taken 40 years of wandering through the wilderness with a band of sheep before Moses was ready to hear from God. But God knew exactly when he was ready to listen. He knew all about Moses, and that showed his concern for him. So again, young people, God knows when you're ready. Because again, God, he knows your beginning date and he knows your end date and he knows everything in between. So God knows and he's preparing you. Again, until we get to that point, God is preparing you to get you to that point. As we look at the preparation of Moses for his assignment, which covers 5 through 6, excuse me, and he said, draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. So as Moses is walking closer toward the bush, Jesus is like, hold on. I need you to stop. First of all, I need you to take your shoes off. Because again, this place that you see, this ground that you see, this is holy ground. And to be sure, young people, the ground itself wasn't holy. There was nothing about the ground that made it holy. Excuse me. There was nothing in the ground that made it holy. The thing that made the ground holy was the fact that God, his presence was there. Right? So anywhere where God's presence is holy ground and needs to be treated with reverence. This is why, young people, it is important when you have the Holy Spirit within you to not take it certain places, to not allow yourself to view certain things, because again, the place that you occupy is holy ground for those of you who are Christians and have the Holy Spirit dwelling in you. So again, keep that in mind, young people, especially those of you that identify as Christian, where you go and the things that you look at, the things that you listen to, because again, you are holy ground. And so you need to conduct yourself in a manner that shows that you are set apart. As we look at verse 6, moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, young people, for he was afraid to look upon God. See, Moses, listen, everything had been passed down from generation to generation. Before Joseph died, he told them, listen, God is not going to leave you all here forever. When God comes for you all and brings you back and puts you in the land that he already promised Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, I want you all to take my bones with you. Don't leave my bones here in Egypt. Take me with you to the new land. So again, they knew because it had been passed down as an oral tradition that eventually at some point God was going to step in. Now 400 years had passed, and to be quite honest, again, as we're looking at it with human eyes, after a while you might have thought that God forgot. Well, we've been here for 400 years. I don't believe that he's going to come and get us. I don't. But again, they knew this. They knew. They may not have believed, or they may not have, they wanted God to act quickly and swiftly, not understanding that things had to be put into place. Things had to be set into motion before God would come in and do the thing that he had already promised. And that's another thing, young people. God doesn't forget his promises. Again, it had been 400 years, but he didn't forget the fact that he had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he was going to give them this land that they each had set foot on at varying parts of their lives. And so upon hearing this, Moses understood and knew, okay, so this is the one. This is the one that spoke to Father Abraham. This is the one that spoke to Isaac. This is the one that spoke to Jacob. And then he realized, oh God, I am not worthy. I'm not worthy to even be in this space. And that's the thing, young people. When you come into contact with God, when you have an encounter with God, the very first thing is you realize how woefully short you come. You realize, man, look at here. You're like Moses. You're covering your face. You're bowing your head. You don't even want to look at it. You don't even want to look at it. And that is another reason why, we can say that the voice from the bush was the pre-incarnated Jesus, because Jesus told his disciples, no one has ever seen my Father. No one. So we know that this wasn't God the Father speaking from this bush. And again, as the scripture told us, it was the angel of the Lord. So again, that's just further confirmation, because again, no one can look upon God and live. And so again, as we look at the preparation of Moses for his assignment, up to this point in Moses' life, he tried to do everything his own way and in his own strength. God thus set about preparing Moses to depend on him. So again, as I said earlier, young people, when we were introducing it, Moses thought that, I'm Moses, I'm Prince of Egypt. I can do whatever I want to do. And then he found out, and you really need to, everything depends on God's timing. And again, you can want to do a thing, but if it's not God's will or it's not God's timing, then it won't be done. The first thing the Lord did was to make Moses aware of his holiness. So again, God then declared himself to be the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. This stresses the fact that God is eternal. He lived when these ancestors of Moses were alive, and he still lived in Moses' day. So again, he knew their names. He communed with them. Moses responded to these revelations about God by hiding his face. He recognized the holiness and eternality of God, and that revealed Moses' own sinful condition and utter helplessness. So again, as I said, young people, when you have an encounter with God, that the first thing that you realize is how you're not. It's almost like I shouldn't be here. Like you're seeing something or you're in an area where you're not supposed to be. That's how holy our God is. That when he comes on the scene, everything else is woefully short. Woefully short. So as we look at God's involvement with his people, which covers Exodus 3:7 through 9, and as we look at God's awareness of his people's suffering, which covers verse 7, and the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. So again, young people, God knows what you're going through. Again, they may have thought 400 years has passed. Joseph has long been dead. Nothing has happened. We haven't heard from him. We don't have any prophets. We don't have anybody to tell us what thus says the Lord. I think he forgot about us. And God is telling Moses in this spot, I know what's going on. I've seen what has happened. They're the Egyptians, young people. And again, when their attitude shifted on the children of Israel, it really shifted. I mean, they really started to treat them, less than, right? Were heavy-handed on them. Heavy-handed on them. And even then, even as they were being heavy-handed, and even as they were forcing them into, back-breaking labor. I mean, this wasn't what you would consider, stay-home work, or this wasn't, office type work. They were doing back-breaking work. They were doing the manual labor that the Egyptian people didn't want to do, that they were reserved essentially for slaves and other people who were essentially day laborers. And really, why pay anybody when you can just use slaves? And so they were being forced to do this back-breaking work, or these other jobs that the Egyptians didn't want to do, and God saw it. He saw what was going on. I'd already mentioned the fact that their babies were being killed at one point because the Pharaoh again saw that they continued to grow, despite the fact that they were oppressing them. God was still blessing them to multiply. And so again, as I said, they got drastic. They took drastic measures to try to curb their growth. And again, when God is with you, there's nothing that anybody can do that's going to stop your growth. There's nothing that they can say or do to you that's going to stop what God has for you. Again, when God has your back, excuse me. And so again, and in addition to the infants being killed, they were also being killed at the hands of these tasks. They were working them to death, and when they weren't moving fast enough, they would beat them to death. So again, God, listen, young people, Don't try to fight your own battles. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. If God feels like someone has wronged you, you let God deal with it. See, because you can't do anything to them whatever you do to them is not going to affect them the way God can affect them, right? You may physically attack them. You may say something verbally to them to hurt their feelings or cause them to cry, but they'll get over that. But when God, let me tell you something, it's a woeful thing to be in the hands of it, to you know what I mean? To be facing his judgment. So again, if someone has wronged you, if someone has hurt you, if someone has done something to you, you put it in God's hand. And then when you put it in God's hand and you see them being God dealing with them, don't laugh. Don't make light of it. Don't judge. Don't do none of that, because he'll turn his vengeance from them and put it on you. So again, young people, don't try to fight your own battles. Let God fight the battle for you. And you're going to see, well, we're not going to see in this lesson, but throughout this whole episode in the children of Israel's history, okay, fine. You want to play with me? Okay, well, fine. We'll play a game and we'll see how you like it at the end. So again, as we look at God's awareness of his people's suffering, the Lord knew the affliction their taskmasters were bringing upon the people of Israel. They were being required, as I said, young people, to build the great treasure cities of the Pharaoh through backbreaking labor. As I said, they were facing the hatred of a people who thought they were capable of joining with the enemies of Egypt in a great rebellion. So again, they were looking at them like, yeah, it's only a matter of time before y'all switch out, before y'all join with, those people that want to come in and do harm to us. So they justified mistreating them and enslaving them by saying, well, we want to make sure that you all don't cause a security risk in our country, if you will. God also told Moses that he knew their sorrows. One of those sorrows was the death of infants, which had taken place at the time of Moses' birth. Another sorrow was the death of those who suffered under the whips of the taskmasters. As I said, listen, God he saw it all. He saw it all. And now God is like, that's enough. It's enough is enough. Now I'm ready to send my servant Moses. It took, to be clear, it took 80 years for Moses to get to a position where God could finally use him to bring the people out. But now is the time. So as we look at God's intentions for his peoples, which covers verses 8 and 9, and I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land, and a large unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. I almost made it through, young people. And so he's saying, I'm going to come down, right? I'm sending you, but we're going to see at the end of the lesson, he's going to. He's telling Moses, I'm coming down. This is enough. I'm done with this now. That's enough. All of the things that I needed to take care of are now almost ready for my people to come out of Egypt. And so I'm going to bring them up out of this land. You see it. He says, and I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and bring them up out of that land unto a good land. So, the children of Israel may have been praying for relief. They may have been praying for, God to ease up the pressure that they were feeling from the Egyptians, but they weren't praying for God to step in and take them away from this place. They had gotten so used to being in Egypt that they weren't even asking God to remove them from this place. And young people, we need to be careful, right, in our walk, in our daily lives, that you make sure that you're not, I'll put it like this. God knows what you really need. So it doesn't do anybody any good for you to either not say what you really want, or to skirt around the whole issue Because again, God knows, and he knows again that they're being oppressed, and he's telling them, you know what, I tell you what, I'm going to bring you up out of this land, and I'm not just going to bring you out of this land and drop you and be like, okay, y'all, take care of yourself. I'm going to bring you up out of this land where you've been oppressed, and I'm going to take you to this other land that is full of milk and honey. And to be honest with you, young people, for those of you who do not or aren't familiar with that phrase, a land flowing with milk and honey, essentially it is very good for agriculture, right? And so when we talk about milk, you're talking about cow, right? You're talking about those animals that graze, right? When you're talking about honey, you're talking about bees. Bees pollinate flower, they pollinate plants, and if the plants are being pollinated, they're going to draw in the animals, and then everything in nature is just taken care of. And so this area that he was bringing them into was going to be suitable for the type of people that they were, and that was an agricultural type people. They raised cattle, they grew crops, and he was taking them to a place. Again, it's just like God to put you and set you up. They didn't do anything. They didn't build anything in the land that they were going to go into. They didn't, none of that stuff. It was all going to be set up for them because, again, of who God is and his character. And as he said, I'm going to take them out of this land and I'm going to put them in a better land, if you will. And again, and he told them that this is a large land. And the way he pointed out that this was a large land that's going to be able to house the 12 tribes of Israel, well, he pointed out the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. If it was big enough for all of those groups of people, and these are all different groups of people, well, then it's going to be big enough for the children of Israel that are, again, one nation, if you will, at this point in their history. And so as we look at verse 9, and it's now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is come unto me, and I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. And again, he's saying, again, I see what's going on. I hear their cry. Again, God hears you, young people. You may have thought, man, I prayed and I didn't hear from God, and God, he didn't respond. So, maybe he didn't hear me, or, maybe no, God heard everything. He heard every prayer. He saw what was going on. And again, he's letting Moses know so Moses can let them know, I got you. And again, the same God that is here in this lesson, right? 1445 BC. It's the same God here in 2022. Same God. Same God that's, I don't want to run ahead. But again, he's the same God, same one that hears your prayer, knows what you're going through, and he's behind the scenes working it out for your good. So you can stand on the fact that, hey, it may not look good right now, but I know God got me. And so again, as we go back and look at God's intentions for his people, God was going to liberate his people from their captivity, but he was also going to bring them up out of that land. It was not, and I love this, young people, it was not enough just to give them their liberty, basically to give them their freedom. Again, like I said, and just be like, okay, y'all free, y'all, go do what you want to do. They needed to have an opportunity for a new life as well. Again, they needed to be set up. Again, it is no different. And to go back to a dark time in this country's history, right after the Civil War, where they had the period of Reconstruction, they freed all the slaves, but they didn't set up anything really to put them in positions to be successful, right? And so you saw at the turn of the century how the failure of the United States government with with the Africans, with the black Americans who had now been given their freedom. Again, as we see in our lesson, God is not just going to free you and then say, all right, go about your own devices. No, I'm going to free you. I'm going to liberate you from these people, and I'm going to set you up over here so you can be successful. Excuse me. So the new life God was offering, to them included a land flowing with milk and honey, as we said earlier. That meant it was a good place for cattle, and the Israelites had cattle. It was also a good place for agriculture, as I said earlier, as indicated by the honeybees that kept the crops pollinated. It was also, it was an ideal land for a people who were used to raising crops as well as sheep and cattle. Again, the land was perfectly set up for what they did. Again, God knows what you need, and he's going to put everything that you need out in front of you so that you can be successful. That's something that you can stand on, young people. That's not something that you have to fret about. Again, and the land was also large enough for them, again, for all of the reasons that I told you earlier with the different groups of people. The Lord again stressed, and I want to say it again, young people, the Lord again stressed his awareness of people's need for freedom from opposition, from oppression. The people had been praying that God would see their plight and send help. The people saw oppression every day, but they had not seen God's overall plan. See, that affects us today. We get frustrated because we don't have all of the information. You know, we want things to happen now, but we don't see the big picture. They had not been asking for deliverance from Egypt. They had not been asking for deliverance from Egypt or a new place to live, but God knew their needs. Again, he knows your need. Even if you don't ask for it, young people, even if you don't ask for it, he knows that you need it. And if it's his will, he will provide it for you. And so and again, God knew their real needs. So as we look at God's plan for his people, which covers 10 and 12, and as we look at a definite goal, which covers verse 10, come now, therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Now he's like, all right, Moses, I'm ready to send you. I'm sending you to Pharaoh. I'm telling you to go. You can go to Pharaoh and tell him, listen, I'm here to collect the children of Israel. And there is no compromise that can be made here. I don't want to hear any alternative plan. The only thing that's going to satisfy me is you letting my people go. Period. And so as we look at, again, a defined goal from the very beginning, God's plan included more than simply a cessation of the oppression. The people wanted to be treated fairly and kindly, but they were not asking to leave Egypt and go to a new land. Again, God knew Pharaoh would offer to Moses a number of compromise plans, but he also knew that none of them would work. The only plan that would work was the one that accomplished his goal of bringing the people out of Egypt into the promised land. That's the only thing that he wanted to hear. And it would take plagues, it would take the death of the firstborn for him to get it, but he would eventually get it. And he would eventually say, you know what, y'all get y'all stuff and get on up out of here. Get up out of here. As we look at personnel to accomplish the plan, which covers verse 11, and Moses said unto God, who am I that I should go unto Pharaoh and that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt? So now Moses is offering up an excuse because, again, see, Moses is not the same impulsive 40-year-old that killed that Egyptian when he was beating the Israelite, right? Now he is an 80-year-old man that's a little more reserved. He's not so quick to just run out and jump into the situation. He's like, I don't know if I'm the one. Who am I? So I'm not a prince anymore. I'm just a shepherd. You see me, I'm out here in the desert. I'm out here tending somebody else's flock. Why are you sending me? Why? Who am I? And again, young people, we have to be careful when we kind of, doubt ourselves, when we feel like we're not good enough, or no, I don't think, no, I heard God call, but I don't think he's not talking to me. I'm this or I'm that. or I'm not like this person who, that's the person who he should send. That, they're way more, advanced. They're way more spiritual. They're way more grounded than I am. But no, he's sending you. That means he's sending the right person. Just like with Moses, he was sending an 80-year-old man to go and tell Pharaoh, the most powerful man on the planet, hey, listen, you need to let them go. I don't care how you finish your building projects, but those people, yeah, we'll be leaving here soon. And so although Moses questioned God's choice, he had all the qualifications. See, that's an important thing, young people. He had all of the qualifications needed. Again, he was raised in the Pharaoh's house. He had all of that background. He had been humbled in the wilderness. He had been leading sheep, which is essentially what he was going to do as he's leading the children of Israel. So again, he was the best person for the job, even though he didn't see it that way. He had all the qualifications necessary to do the work God wanted him to do. He had been raised in the Egyptian palace and therefore knew his way around. He was better qualified than any other Israelite to stand in the court of the Pharaoh representing God. Again, he had intimate knowledge of that court. Moses had also spent many years training to lead people. Again, Moses was a prince of Egypt. His early years in the Egyptian court had taught him important lessons in that regard. In fact, he had been so confident, and this is when you see Moses that I'm just going to do what I want to do. He was so confident in his ability that he had expected the Israelites to follow him when he killed an Egyptian man who was beating an Israelite. He's like, surely y'all gonna recognize me and be like, yeah, Moses. Okay, that's our guy. We're gonna follow Moses. And he found out, no, it doesn't work like that. Moses' 40 years of leading sheep through the wilderness had humbled him to the place where he was willing to do things God's way instead of taking matters into his own hands, as when he killed that Egyptian. His father-in-law Jethro had great possessions, and Moses had learned to follow his advice and leadership. And that relationship, young people, would come in handy again as Moses is leading the people through the wilderness. That prepared him to follow God as well, because again, Moses was, young people, he went from prince to homeless. Jethro took him in, and set him up, and again gave him his daughter's hand in marriage. So again, he was able to listen to him, and that was a precursor to him being able to hear the call of God and to heed God's call. The greatest qualification Moses possessed was the fact that he had been called by God. Listen, each and every one of you that are a Christian, that has accepted Christ into your life, you were called. You were called by God. He was God's choice, and that removed the excuses. That removed the excuses. He knew what God wanted him to do. Again, I don't care what your physical situation is. I don't care what even your mental situation. Really, again, if God has called you, he's going to take care of all of those things. Again, God doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't, he's not like, some of our favorite, sports teams. And we'll use that as an example, right? They can hire, coach, general manager, whatever, and then realize, 2 or 3, or even sometimes the very next season, oh, this was the wrong guy. Oh, we got to get him out. We got to blow him out. We got to fire him. It doesn't happen like that with God. If God makes a choice, that's the right choice. He doesn't have to go back and go find another coach because the first coach he hired, it didn't work out. And so he was to return to the land of Egypt, approach Pharaoh, and lead the people out of Egypt and into the promised land. That was the task God had prepared him for his whole life, for all of his life. Again, as I said, he started out in the palace. He ended up in the wilderness by himself dealing with the sheep. He had to be humbled. He had to be brought to a spot where he understood, okay, I'm depending on you, God. This is not me. I can't do anything in this situation. So let me follow your lead. So as we look at our final verse, assurances for accomplishing the plan, which covers verse 12, as I said. And he says, certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be a token unto thee that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain. So he's telling them, listen, I've already seen you bring the children of Israel out of Egypt. And I'm going to tell you something. You're going to bring them right back to this same spot where me and you are having this conversation at right now. And that's going to be the sign to you that I was with you the whole time. And see, that's big, young people. That's big because, again, God hears. He understands that you may have doubts. He understands that you may have concerns. And sometimes he will relieve those concerns by telling you, hey, I'm going with you. I will be with you. I'll be there with you. Or he tells you or shows you, hey, this is the future. This is what the future is going to look like. And so that you can get that peace of mind to know that, okay, all right, I can operate in what he's asking me to do because I've seen the big picture. God showed me the entire picture, and so now I can respond and do what I need to do to accomplish the mission that God has laid out for me. And so again, as we look at it, God promised Moses that he would have everything he needed, and that God himself would provide, and that God himself would provide. First of all, God promised to provide his own presence. Again, certainly I will be with thee. God would be right there with him, and there would no longer be any reason to doubt that he cared. Again, if he didn't care, he wouldn't send Moses. First of all, if he didn't care, he'd just tell Moses to go and come back to him, when you get the job done. Or he wouldn't even say nothing. He would have just let them suffer in Egypt as slaves, if he didn't care about them. He would have let you stay in the situation that you was in if he didn't care about you, being tossed around and beat down. He would have left you in that situation if he didn't care about you, but he cares about you. So he brought you out, or he sent somebody to give you a hand. He would give Moses the power to do miracles. He would speak with him and give him direction both in Egypt and in the wilderness. And you'll see throughout Moses' writings, young people, how him and God, they had a special relationship, right? Again, we have God residing inside of us in the form of the Holy Spirit. But, Moses would go up and commune with God, so much so that when he came down after one of those excursions, he had to cover his face because God's glory was just shining off of Moses and blinding the people. That's the kind of relationship that he had. That's the kind of relationship that we want to foster here today. We want to foster a type of relationship where people can hardly look at you because God's glory is shining so bright off of you. He promised, the second assurance God gave to Moses was an assurance of success. The Lord told Moses that when he had brought the people out of Egypt, he would serve God upon this mountain. God gave Moses a vision of the future. He promised him that one day he would return to the mountain of God to worship as the leader of the Exodus. There could be no doubt that God would do what he had promised to do. As I said, young people, and you'll hear me say it a lot, God is not like man that he should lie. If God tells you something, or if God sends somebody to tell you what he said, he's going to do what he said. It may not happen in the timeline that you want, but it is going to happen. As we move into our real life application, it is often difficult for teens really to believe that God is concerned about, again, young people, as we've said, I understand. You've got a lot of things going on. You think that no one hears you, no one understands you. Again, as I've said before, God does. God is concerned about the problems that you all face. Broken relationships, unsympathetic teachers, and bossy employers just don't seem like the problems that would interest the God of all creation. Yet one of the great truths about God is that he is concerned about each and every one of us, especially you young people. One reason teens assume that God does not care is because One reason teens assume that God does not care is because He often does not solve you all's problems the way that they want you to, the way you want it to be solved. When a couple and listen to this, listen to these examples, young people. When a couple ends a dating relationship, one of them may want God to get them back together. And you all know exactly what I'm talking about. You all have broken up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, and you've been sad, and you wanted God to, oh, please bring her back. Please bring him back. Oh, I love him. Oh, I love her. Oh, I miss her. Oh, God, what am I going to do without her? Let me tell you something, young people. He may have a greater, God has a greater plan in mind. He may want He may want you to learn from that broken relationship how to handle and maintain the lifelong marriage relationship with someone else He is one day going to send you. So you may have to go through that bad relationship. You may have to deal with that person so that you can know how to deal with your next relationship. How you can know how to, okay, I don't like this, I don't like that, and I need to make sure that I do this and this so that I maintain this relationship. Another young person, again, you may have a personality class with one of your teachers. And I know that to be true, young people, because I've walked in your shoes. I've had good teachers that I didn't care for, and teachers that I just downright couldn't stand and wanted nothing to do with. So I know you know that feeling. And you may say, oh, God, can you please just remove this person? Good Lord, man, can something happen? I mean, good Lord. So you may want God to solve the immediate problem by removing the teacher, or you may want to go to your parents and say, "Oh man, can you please drop this class? All this teacher is so blah blah blah, this, that, and the third." But listen again, young people, God may have again a bigger goal in mind. He may be preparing you for the day that you become a teacher, so that you see how that person treated the classroom and say, "Okay, I don't want to do that. When I become a teacher, I want to do this, this, and this. I don't want to do what they did because that is ineffective." And so again, He's setting you up so you can come up with your own way of dealing with people or dealing with students when you become a teacher. Everything that happened to Moses all through his life had a part in preparing him to lead God's people in the Exodus. Again, as I said, young people, first 40 years were spent in luxury, being taught everything, given everything. The next 40 years he was humbled, he was brought low. He had to deal with, again, he's out there with sheep, dealing with them, and that prepared him for those children of Israel that he was going to deal with. And it wasn't just it wasn't a short trip, young people. This was a 40-year journey. Moses is going to be 120 years old by the time he leaves this world, and the children of Israel are on the precipice of going into the promised land that God has promised them. But again, everything that happened in his life was set up for that moment that God was going to put him in. Part of learning, and I love this, young people, part of learning to trust God is accepting the fact that He knows what is best for us and therefore knows how to prepare us for what is best. His presence will never leave the believer, and His promise is that, listen to this, young folks, He which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. That is Philippians 1 verse 6. And simply put, young people, what He started in you, He's going to continue to take care of it until the day that Jesus comes back to take us all into heaven. So you can be sure that God is going to stay with you until the time that Jesus comes and gets us. And so, young people, we've come to the end of our very first lesson of the fall quarter. Again, obedience and leadership, and obedience as unit one, beginning with obedience. I hope that you were blessed by this lesson. I hope that you put some of the practical points of this lesson into your daily walk. Again, despite what you may think of yourself, despite circumstances that surround you. Again, if God has called you, he will use you. Doesn't matter if you don't think, it doesn't matter whether or not you think you're qualified or not. I can promise you that you are. You are uniquely qualified for whatever it is he's asking you to do. And so, young people, again, as I didn't introduce myself, my name is Bruce. And as we do at the end of our videos, young people, we like to invite those of you who have not known Christ, who do not know the pardoning of sins. If you haven't accepted Christ into your life, listen, it's a simple thing. All you have to do is confess with your tongue and believe in your heart that Jesus died. He was buried. He was dead for 3 days. He rose after the third day. He is not in a tomb. He is not dead. He is alive right now on the right hand of God, interceding on our behalf every day, saying, I died for that. I died for that. He even sent down a helper to take care, to help us as we walk through this life in the form of the Holy Spirit. And if you want that power, if you want that to be a part of your life, then all you have to do is simply accept him into your heart. Confess with your tongue and believe and find a Bible believing church. Plug in with the saints. Plug in with brothers and sisters that can sow into you and to help you grow, to answer any questions that you may have about different scriptures in the Bible. That can help you again grow your gift that God has already given you. But again, until you accept him, you won't know it. So please, young people, do not delay. If God has called you, if you've heard someone call your name and you've looked around and you've not seen somebody, that's God. That's God calling you. And he's trying to get your attention. And the moment you give him your attention, then he'll reveal everything that you need to be. He'll reveal everything he needs to reveal to you at that point. So until the next time, young people, again, I'm blessed by you all's viewing the videos. I'm blessed by you all subscribing. I'm blessed by you all sharing. Thank you all so much. I pray that God continues to bless you all. I pray that you all, again, use these lessons and put them into practice. Use the practical points in your daily lives. Until the next time, I will see you all back again on the corner, JMG Corner Ministries. So until next time, young people, God bless.
My sins are forgiven. My future is